underway. I'm just so excited. But
It's
yeah,
preparing their live stream right now.
Yeah, I just saw a little red live.
10 seconds.
Excellent. You let me know, Barry, and then we'll roll. And again, a good practice is to mute your microphones unless you're talking. By chance, an ambulance drives by in the background.
Okay, we are live on YouTube.
Okay, we're live on YouTube. Hi, everybody. Hi, students that are here as part of the ASU Film Spark Film TV Boot Camp. And welcome to the students on Film Spark's YouTube live stream. We're really excited that we get to share this really special panel, not just with our boot camp students, of which there are 17 or 18 students here with us participating in the boot camp, but we'll also be able to share it with anyone, alumni or student, ASU affiliated, that's interested in building a career in the creative industries. And we're so delighted that we're able to share this boot camp experience in panels that are part of the boot camp that was created by the extraordinary Howard Burkons, ASU alum, who graduated, I don't know, maybe like 10 or so years ago, maybe a little bit more than that, but who came to Hollywood and didn't have anybody to help give him any directions at all. Had to rely on his friends, some of whom are on the panel today, but mostly had to figure it out on his own. And he created this wonderful film, TV career boot camp to give aspiring filmmakers, television people, people interested in careers in the entertainment industry, a leg up and some insight and really to receive what he didn't get when he came out here. And we're just delighted that we're able to share this with you all. And today's panel that Howard has assembled for us is focused on the business of you, an expression coined by Howard. It's so important to know how to think of yourself not only as a human being, but also as a business, because in the creative industries, your business is you. And so you have to find a way to maintain your authenticity and the trueness of who you are, particularly in the creative industries. That's critical. But then also you need to be able to know how to present yourself professionally and how to communicate your professional story and find ways for that to be meaningful for the people that you're trying to advance your career with. And we're just so lucky that in addition to Howard, who'll be moderating today, we have Cheryl, Camp Smith, David Mickey Evans, the inimitable John Jackson, who has been a Film Spark devotee from way back, Pat Peach, an alumni and excellent producer. I'm going to let these folks introduce themselves. Also, Fred Ramondi, Diane Weepert, and I hope you'll forgive me if I mispronounce your name, Diane. But I want to just thank everybody from the bottom of my heart for participating in this. And again, thank Howard for putting this panel together for us. Thank you so much. And I hope everybody has a great experience here today. I'm going to pass it to Howard.
Hi guys. Hi everybody out there. Everybody in boot camp and out in the great unknown cyberspace. I would like to start off today by welcoming the first of our illustrious guests, Mr. David Mickey Evans, director, writer, producer, dear, darling, sweet man, friend of mine who I had the pleasure of meeting by reading. We shared an attorney once upon a time, and he'd written a script called Radio Flyer, which I got to read, and I then realized what greatness was in a screenplay. It was, at the time, and still to this day, one of the greatest screenplays I've certainly ever read, and it is a brilliant piece of literature that is in the format of a screenplay. And it transcended into a relationship that I cherish, and we became friends, and we've been colleagues, and I've had the pleasure of working with Dave, and I would like to turn it over to Mr. David Mickey Evans. Dave, if you please.
Hello, everyone. Everything Howard said is absolutely true. We've been friends for over 30 years now, and I don't know what I'd do without him. Sorry about the background. My personal security agent is protecting me. So basically, how I got into the industry, what was my little story? Is that it? Okay. Graduated high school, went to college at Loyola Marymount, started as a business major, failed miserably, switched to communication arts. Had always wanted to make movies, write movies, be involved in movies in some way. Since I had been 14 and saw Star Wars, it just blew my mind and put me over the top. Went to college. I got 2 BAs because I doubled up. At the end of that, I had nowhere to go. So these guys are all past now, but Ben Abaney, Warren Sherlock, and all the original developers of the LMU communications department said, well, just get an MA. So I said, okay. So I stayed another 2 years and got 2 MAs, one in film production, one in screenwriting. Had nowhere to go. So I moved into my little brother's house. I told him it'd only be for 3 months. 3.5 years later, I moved out. Tried to join the Navy. They wouldn't take me. And during that time, I was writing, and I'd written a bunch of, not even B movies. We're talking C and D movies, direct to VHS and all that in college and so on and so forth. And I decided I was going to write a book, and that if nothing happened with it, I would go get a job. So I wrote a book called Radio Flyer. And nobody in my gene pool from the beginning of time had ever had anything to do with the entertainment industry. However, I had a girlfriend who worked in a CPA's office who happened to represent some entertainment professionals. And she was friendly with this guy's daughter, who was a film student. And she showed him this particular book. She gave it to an attorney that she knew, who that's the one that Howard and I shared for all those years. He called me and said, you turn this into a screenplay. So I did. Still didn't really have access. Got an agent who was, believe it or not, the literary agent at a child's talent agency, if there is such a thing, okay? And he had some similar experiences in life regarding what the content of Radio Flyer is. He was a gym buddy of a guy named Pete McElveen, who worked as a development guy for Michael Douglas on the Warner's lot back in the day in the early 90s. He gave him the script. The guy didn't read it. That agent's father had been a commercial director in the 50s and 60s with Richard Donner, the great Richard Donner, the director. And somehow he called Richard Donner and said, you got to read the screenplay. And a week later, 2 weeks later, that script broke the spec sales script record in Hollywood. And from then until now, I've never stopped working. So a very weird way, but there really is no right way to get in. I knew nobody, so I sort of, in retrospect, had to let my work do the talking, and it sort of did. So that's my story in a nutshell.
Thank you, Dave. Next, I would like to have the pleasure of introducing Fred Raimondi, a director, visual effects genius, special effects genius, a man from New Jersey who knows how to cook really good food and knows what good food is, entertains like nobody else, and has taught me more about how you can learn anything at any time in your life, because he does and has. There's nothing Fred can't teach himself and hasn't gone out of his way to learn. We met when he was at Digital Domain doing magic for them. And I came in with a Sammy Davis Jr. project and to build a virtual Sammy Davis Jr. And Fred and I became brothers under a moment's notice. It was love at first sight. He has saved my butt many, many times and made my movies wonderful. So Fred, go, please.
Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Howard, for that lovely introduction. It doesn't get much better than that. My journey as a filmmaker and an artist started before I even knew what being a filmmaker and an artist was. When I was a little boy, one Sunday afternoon, my dad called me into the room and there was a movie on, and he was like, "Come here, you got to watch this." And it was King Kong. And so I'm watching the movie and I'm going, "This is the most amazing freaking thing I've ever seen." But something in the back of my head said, "But why is the fur on his back keep rising up?" Well, I knew nothing about stop motion animation, and that's where my curiosity began. I was also that kid that all he wanted to do was make films, since I could pick up my dad's 8mm camera, and I did. I probably made my first film at 8 or 9 with the camera, a little stop motion. And I played guitar. So my parents were like David. I had no artists in my family at all. So my parents were like, "What do we do with this kid?" And to them, an artist was a guy who painted a picture. So went to college, got a degree in broadcast journalism with a concentration in filmmaking. Was still doing photography, and started interning in New York City. I worked for this guy, Ted Estabrook, who was Jacques Cousteau's cameraman, and had this group that was set up by William Paley and the head of NBC. What the hell was his name? The general. Anyway, yeah, David Sarnoff. Because there was no place for people to get hard and fast knowledge of how to make TV news quickly. So he had this, it was like a boot camp, and I did that for a summer. And then this is the kind of the part of making your own opportunities. I was doing all kinds of stuff at the time, and I was PAing on a film, and I loved editing. Editing was always the thing that I would love directing films and then shooting them, but then I couldn't wait to get into the edit room to start to, I love the solitary thing of being in the edit room. And I was PAing on a film, and my job on this film, believe it or not, as many of you guys will probably have, we were shooting it in an apartment in New York City. And my job was, every time they rolled camera, was to take the phone off the hook, because we were in an apartment, and if the phone rang, it would blow the take. Well, during one of the takes, the producer of the film, a young woman named Marlon Hecht, we happened to be, in the room, and in between takes, she said, so what do you really want to do? I know you're PAing. And I said, well, I really love editing, and I think post-production, because this was like in the mid to late 70s, I think post-production is going to be a pretty big growth industry. And she goes, well, do you edit? I was like, yeah. She was like, write me a proposal for a small editing facility. So I did. I gave it to her. This was like November-ish. The day after Christmas, I got a phone call from her. She says, the equipment is coming on January 6th, and you start on the 7th. So I kind of made my own opportunity, and I built her facility. I had a little bit of engineering background, not a lot, enough to put a stereo together, but applied it to video. Did that for a while. Worked for her started to make my bones as an editor there. Then I worked for another place called Adwar Video. Then I got an opportunity to move to California to work for Channel 13, worked there for a while, then NBC. And then I went to a place called the Post Group. All this whole time, my concentration was really on editing. I had no idea about visual effects or anything like that. But I was a good editor. And So working at the Post Group, my boss there, Rich Thorne, saw something in me that I didn't even see. And he kind of goaded me. He was like, look, I really want you to become an editor. And one of the first gigs that he put me on was a show when the Twilight Zone came back to television in 85 or 86. I did that. I learned visual effects, worked with Rob Legato and Bruno George on that. Rob Legato, I think he has 4 Academy Awards now. He was like my mentor on that. And then Rob, who was one of the visual effects supervisors on that show, ended up being the visual effects supervisor when Star Trek came back, The Next Generation. And he ran into me in the hall and he was like, you're doing it. And so there I was, I got another humongo break doing all the visual effects compositing on Star Trek The Next Generation, did that. Then I had my own facility for a while called Planet Blue. When I was done with that, when I was there, I realized that I really didn't want to be a businessman. I really wanted to be a creative. And one of my clients was a guy named Ed Ulbrich, a big deal commercial producer, and from Chicago. And we were in a session one day. I was doing some work for him, and he says, he goes, I'm freaking out. And I was like, why? And he said, I just got the job as the head of commercials for Digital Domain. And I'm like, they aren't even open yet. And he was like, yeah, he goes, I'm going to be starting the division. And I was like, take me with you. And he said, well, you own this place. I said, I don't care. I'll sell my interest. This was June. By November, I was starting at Digital Domain. I worked there for 15 years, doing visual effects compositing and visual effects supervision. And then did hundreds I didn't work in the feature side. I worked only in commercials. I probably did 300 or 400 commercials while I was there, visual effects. Won a bunch of Clios, won an MTV astronaut for a Rolling Stones video I did with David Fincher called Love is Strong. Nominated for, won a Grammy for that same video. And I have something like 9 commercials in the permanent collection of the Museum of Modern Art in New York, in the art and science of the American television commercial. In 2008, after being there 15 years, I decided I was going to go be a commercial director. And I did that for a while, which I still do. And then since 2008 till now, I've been directing commercials. I've been doing visual effects for a very select clientele, Howard being one of them. I just got back from Georgia, visual effects supervising a movie called The Tiger Rising, which is based on the Kate DiCamillo book, doing the visual effects for that. And I've been working on that every day since about October, and we'll probably be working on it till June, doing most of the visual effects myself here at home. I have another vendor in India doing some of the work. But that's kind of my story. That brings us up to today. And on the movie, I also directed second unit. I shot all the live tiger stuff. So I got to spend 6 days with a live tiger, which was really fun. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Thank you, Fred. All right. Well, I'd like to now have the pleasure of introducing Mr. Patrick Peach, Pat Peach, Arizona State alumni. Pat is the hardest working producer in Hollywood. He owns that title. Pat has done every job you can do, and he's done it well, and he's done it on his own. He's the essence of a guy who goes out and gets it done. Mr. Peach, take it away.
Thank you very much, Howard. You're really gracious today with all of us. Thank you very much. It was 1976, and I was thinking about what I was going to do after college. And I think the only person who knows this story is John. But the Volkswagen Rabbit came out that year, and the Greyhound Park was giving a Volkswagen Rabbit away. Greyhound Park, I don't know if it's still in existence there, was the dog tracks that ran greyhounds every day. And you'd go and bet on them. So I went to the dog tracks and saw they were giving this Volkswagen Rabbit away. And I had a terrible car and I needed a car. And I said, I'm going to win this car. And they gave one away for every 2 weeks for, I guess, 10 weeks or something like that. And you had to get picked out of a drawing, and out of the 3 people they would pick that had to be present when they drew the drawing, each one reached into a basket, pulled out a key, and the key that worked won the car. The other 2 people got 100 gallons of gas. And I had planned a trip to go around the country that year for the bicentennial, so I could decide whether I was going to move to New York or California. So I wanted a car to do it in, and at least I'd have 100 gallons of gas, I thought. So, but again, I have to be one of the 3. And I systematically set out to win it, and I did win it. And the fact that I did that, and it's a long story, but the fact that I actually pulled it off told me I could do anything. And that is the truth. It's sort of like, I couldn't believe that I actually said I'm going to win this car, and I had my whole family filling out. I had hundreds of entries that went into the basket, and just the concept that I could do that told me I could do anything, and I actually believed that when I moved out and started. I didn't know anyone when I came out, except one person that I'd gone to. I was in Boy Scouts with, who's now a established working actor, Bob Field, and he and I moved in together. And the first within about a year, it took me about a year to get figured out something, and I met this. I was at a Sid Field screenwriting seminar at this place called Sherwood Oaks Experimental College, which was run by the brother of the guy who wrote the original Aliens, and Gary Schusert. And I was sitting there, and these 2 guys, 2 Scientologists who'd sold a script or 2 and just had options they'd sold, said, "We need an agent. We got new screenplays and we need an agent." And I said, "Okay, I'll do that." And I'd come out to write and act, and I thought, I don't know how to meet anyone, so I figured this could be a good way to do it. And I went out trying to sell their screenplays, and I met so many people. And I was this skinny 23-year-old with long blonde hair, and I would go to the studios, get through the gate, say, "I'm here to deliver this to the head of the studio or the head of development," and I'd go in, just walk in and hand it to him. Here I am in his office. I didn't have the plan to pitch or something like that, because that would have been a little crazy, and I did the way my plan was to be a little subversive. So I'd go in and I'd say, "I'm delivering this for Mr. Peach," and I'd make them sign for it. Then I walk out to the payphone on the lot and call them, and say, "Did you get my script? I need that read right away, because I'm going to get it out to everyone else if you're not going to get to it." And I've done a lot of phone sales, so I know I could be anybody on the phone. So from a telemarketing standpoint, I was 6'7" and a major player. So I did that for about a year, and I met so many different producers, and one of them was this guy who was his name was Ted Michaels, and they called him King of the D movies. And he made such classics as The Corpse Grinders and The Girl in the Gold Boots and The Doll Squad and Alex Joseph and His 7 Wives. He made some really crappy movies, but he offered me sitting there. He assessed me immediately and said, "So what are you doing this weekend? I need some extra grips on this movie." And boom, me and my buddy or my roommate are doing this. We're on the crew of this super low budget schlock film called The Aftermath, which I die in 4 times. So I got to work on every crew, and I established some of the best friends that I have in the business still. A guy who's been my editor, my go-to editor forever. I met on that, and one of my first DPs, Randy Sellers, and roommate and buddy, I met on that thing, and and another guy, Steve Ross, who shot my first feature. So it turned out to be a really lucrative thing, and we all created a network and would get each other jobs. And I ended up working on a lot of different crews and a lot of deferred films, getting no pay, but getting a lot of experience. And probably, I guess, when a couple of years later, I got this call from one of those guys and said, "Hey, I'm going to shoot this low budget film. It's really, this guy has a trust fund. He's right out of Santa Barbara film school, and he needs a production manager." And I said, "Only if I get a role," because I thought at that time I wanted to be an actor. And they gave me, he said, "No problem." The guy said, "Yeah, I can do that," over the phone. Hadn't met me, anything. And I ended up, as I was production managing this thing, which I'd never done before, I also realized that there was no real producer on the thing. And I just said to the guy after a couple of weeks, I said, "I'm doing everything. I think I'm the producer." And he said, "Yeah, I think so." And it was like that. And it was a crazy little terrible film that I didn't even read the complete script before doing, which is, never do that. And I learned so much from doing it. And what I learned is that I could, as I suspected, I could do anything, because that's what I believed. And I pulled it off, making a million mistakes, but I learned from each one of them. And after that film was made, I got it. Somehow somebody wrote an article in the Hollywood Reporter about it. It was a very small article, about an inch, and said that I'd made this $60,000 film. And back then it was like making a $3,000 film now. So, because it was 35 millimeter, analog film, as opposed to the simplicity of what you can do now. We had 40 locations and 30 actors. It was quite an impossible task, and we did it, and nobody got paid. And I ran it through my checking account. And this guy wrote an article about it, and I got called by every studio, but amazingly, no one hired me from that. No, I got nothing out of that. And I thought I was going to start a career right then. I thought, okay, now everyone's going to call me and hire me. And of course, that's not how it works. You have to generate every bit of your own work. And I started working on every crew I could to pay my rent. And I worked on probably over 100 or so, at least 100 movies, commercials, TV shows, industrials, anything, on any crew that I could get on. And I had this house full of roommates, John Jackson being one of them. And we got each other work. There were 6 of us living in this Spanish Mediterranean mansion in Hollywood Hills. It was kind of amazing. It was like our own film fraternity. And we'd get each other jobs. And I was the producer in the group, always on the phone, but I was also out there with my gloves and dealing with C-stands and humping cables. So after about, I would say that I did that most of deep into the 80s. And I'd only produced one film. And then it just started happening. And I started to get my own work and get a reputation as a producer. And eventually it became one of these things that I didn't have to necessarily constantly generate my own work. I'd get called for a lot of work. But it was my belief that I could do anything. And so that confidence, whatever you can do to create your confidence, is a secret, because it does come off. It is a very appealing thing to see someone with great confidence and enthusiasm, regardless of how much they know. But fortunately, I've been very lucky at being able to continue to do it, and I enjoy it very much.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you very much. I would like now to introduce Cheryl Camp-Smith, editor extraordinaire. She has She has made half-hour comedies come to life over and 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 over again. She's a delightful human being and a lovely hostess and a dear friend. Cheryl, please take it away.
Okay, mine's a little different how I went into editing. I actually wanted to be a recordist engineer after hearing Yellow Brick Road because I couldn't sing, I couldn't play an instrument, but I wanted to be part of that. So I didn't know where to go, and I heard that Pasadena City College had the best broadcast communication television program ever, and it was cheap. So I went in there, I went radio, and I started engineering PCC. Back then, that was PCC. One morning at 6 a.m., I was going in to engineer a radio station, and they accidentally booked 2 engineers. So I said, you take it, I'll just walk around. It was the first day of scheduling, and back then it was not internet. You had to get in line. There was no, a booking on the internet. So I saw these kids outside, they were my age, outside the scheduling office. And I said, what are you there for? They go, TV 101. And I said, really? And they said, yeah, they go, only 10 people get in. It's really hard to get in and you have to come early. So I said, well, I'll take a chance. So I sat down, I got into the television program, and it was amazing. It actually opened my eyes. And at first I thought I wanted to do camera because we actually did a low budget talk show at 6 a.m. on KTTV. And I actually got my first credit. And then I go, no, camera sucks. So I decided, we began to do editing. And I go, I like this editing. I really do. So that's when I started thinking, I really, really want to edit. And by chance, I went to Cal Poly after that to study engineering. And after that, I dropped out because I got a job at a place called Spotlight that was just like Showtime back in the day. We're talking 1978. 78. So I was air switching, and they had a CMX, which was a top editing linear system in what, the places used back then. So I sent myself up to CMX school to learn editing because we used to do promos there, and came back down, started editing on CMX. And then I started just going out there and just trying to hustle any free editing there is. I even worked at TBN, Trinity Broadcast Network, which is an interesting story, but I won't go into that. And so I did that, and I learned Mach 1 there, and I just learned as much equipment as I could. And then what I did was, because again, no internet, I went to the library and got something called LA 411, which is still around if you go online. It has all the post facilities. It has all of the visual effects. Anything you want to know about the industry is in there. So I just started writing letters, putting out my resume, and eventually I got a job at this small place called Horizontal Editing, which was hideous. We did everything from music videos to porn. And yes, I did, but it won't be on my resume, but it was just getting experience. And so, anyway, I did that. And then I started sending out more resumes because I wanted to get out of that place so bad. And I got a job at Post Group. And that was a top place at the time. I mean, we did Max Headroom, we did, Star Trek, we did all the music videos. But I had to go in as an assistant editor because the equipment, they had a CMX, but they had also the top ADOs, and you guys would not know what this is. Grass Valley 300s, I'm foreign words right now. So anyway, I would go on weekends and learn the equipment, and I also got mentored. Also, that's also very important, is getting mentored. And so eventually I became editor, and I was 2 or 3 of, I'm going to say maybe 20-ish editors that were male, and it was 3 of us, or 2 or 3 of us that were female. I worked there for, I'm going to say 11 years, and then I moved on to Complete Post, which does a lot of half-hour comedy. And I then worked there for 10 years, and then the industry just totally changed, and I wanted to go freelance. And when I went freelance, it was so hard. That was a changing thing. I didn't know who to contact. I didn't know how to contact. I then got mentored from another friend editor on how to do things. And I did everything, like Howard said, I did half-hour comedy, but I also did reality. I've done documentaries. I took grab anything I could get. And it was hard to do, to make my circle bigger. It was hard, first of all, I had so many interviews, and you get discouraged, and you get, it's never going to happen. And it eventually does happen. You just got to keep going. And also, like someone said, confidence. I didn't have confidence going in there, but I had to look like I had confidence. I mean, I was scared as crap. And so one of my worst interviews was I interviewed for a show, and this was just about 4 years ago. It's still, I have bad interviews. And the whole staff was there. So like 20 people, and that's usually not normal. And I'm sitting there, and I had just gotten back from New Jersey. I was burnt from the boat. It was hot, and it was May, and it was hot on the Fox lot, and I was sweating like broadcast news. And I just kept babbling, and it was just terrible. And I left there going, that's one of the worst interviews I ever had. So anyway, going on with that is that I did a lot of interviews, and you just keep going, and you just keep writing. You just keep looking up, like I said, LA 411. Just keep putting out your resumes. Grab anything you can just to get the experience. And when I did start getting a lot of jobs. I was just rolling into shows. And then eventually I had a dry spell again. And that was just like 2 years ago. And I finally got an agent. And then from that agent, I was crappy. So I finally went on to another agent. And then I started getting more shows and again, building. So you're always going to go, sometimes you'll go through lulls. Some people do, some people don't. I went through several lulls, and you just got to keep putting your foot forward. And so then eventually I then got an ABC show, and then I was on One Day at a Time when we went into this pandemic. And we have 7 more shows that I'm waiting to see what happens. But all I can say is you're going to be scared going into your interviews. You're going to be nervous. You try and just calm down, and then you just go in there and you just be yourself, be personable, just say what just listen to them, look them in the eye, and you're not going to get everything. Eventually, though, you are going to get something. And that's the only thing I can say. So that's my journey.
Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you very much. Mr. John Jackson, Arizona State alum, the actor extraordinaire, the actor who convinced me that I was not an actor watching him act, because I knew what talent was when I saw it and I did not have it. He is a tremendous casting director. He is a lovely man. He has forgiven me all my sins often, and I appreciate that. John, take it away.
Okay, so I'm talking to students now, right? I'm gonna look at the 4 of you because I like to know who I'm talking to. Listening to everybody, it's causing me to reflect on just exactly how I got where I am right now. And I got to be really honest with you. I'm like the Blanche Dubois of the film industry. I have always depended upon the kindness of strangers, because in every situation, in every monumental situation that I'm thinking about that got me here, it was because of someone else's help. Someone else's saying, oh, I can't do this, you go do it, or something. And what that says to me is the importance of networking, what Cheryl and some of the others have been talking about widening your circle. And that's really, I guess, what I'm so struck by is just how many of the life-changing things that happened to me were because of someone else. I mean, I'm sitting right here now because of Howard and Adam. And so as you enter this fray, whatever you're going to do, whether you're going to be a writer, director, actor, producer, whatever, just know that those people that you meet as you work through this, if you're smart, you're going to keep them with you for a long, long time and use them. No, that's a joke. Okay. So, take advantage of them. And I mean that in a really positive way, not in a horrible way. And that's what's really striking me. Howard helped me get my very first agent as an actor in Los Angeles, or one of my very first. You know, it's because of Howard's wife that I got my first job at a talent agency. You know, it's because of my other friends from college that I got work to pay the rent in the tech part of the industry. Everything, you open yourself up to it, and you make certain that you have the skill and the ability to perform for the people who give you the opportunities. But those opportunities are going to come from just a myriad of places that you don't even know. Get your education and learn what you can learn, and know what you need to know to get where you want to go. But understand, you're going to need other people to help you get there. That's what's striking me about all of these conversations. And I would gladly give you my resume and talk to you for hours about who I am and what I've done, but I'm not going to. So that's what I have to say to you. I hope you're listening.
And they are, John, and that was perfectly stated and beautifully stated. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Howard.
Diane Weipert it is my dear, darling pleasure it's coming to us live from San Francisco. And Diane is a tremendous writer, director, novelist, the most talented, hardest working writer I know. Go, take it away, Diane, please.
All right. Yeah, my journey is also a little different. I don't know, this might sound familiar to some of you, but the one big difference is that there was nothing about my upbringing as a girl growing up in Colorado that made me think even remotely of the possibility of being in film or of writing for film, much less directing. It never even occurred to me. So what I wanted to do was just be a gypsy when I finished college, went to school in Boulder. And then when I finished, I just took off with my backpack and traveled around South America and Cuba and Mexico for 13 months. And it just, yeah, I just figured I'd drift around for as long as I wanted and then figure I'd probably write about it. I always wanted to be a writer. I always wrote, but I loved film from the time I was in high school. I loved art films and foreign films and independent films, but it never occurred to me that I could actually work in film, much less write them. So when I came back from South America and I moved to San Francisco, just because my sister was out here, you know, and I wanted to live in a more interesting, diverse, fascinating place. And I started volunteering for film festivals, mostly the Latino film festivals, because I'd lived in Spain when I was in college. I spent all that time in Latin America. So I wanted to meet interesting Latin American directors and producers. So I would drive people around. I'd pick them up at the airport and I'd drive them to their hotels and I'd take them out to dim sum in Chinatown, and they just loved it. I mean, San Francisco is an easy sell for people coming from other places. And I ended up meeting this Mexican director who I got along well with. It turns out I picked him up from the airport because he was traveling, but he lives in Berkeley, or he lived at the time in Berkeley. And we got along well, and he ended up calling me up several months later and asking if I would be interested in writing a film for him. He needed an unproduced screenplay. He was someone that wanted to be seen as a writer-director, but he wasn't a writer, and had one produced film that he had directed. And he'd been nominated for something called the NHK Award. It's a Japanese award, I guess, that they give a grant to someone to make a film that has had one produced film and then has an unproduced screenplay. And he wanted me to write that screenplay because someone had nominated him. And I'd never even read a screenplay. And so he came and, you know, gave me some screenplays. He had the software downloaded on my computer and had me write. We sat around and we talked about this story, and then he had me write it. And I wrote it in like 4 days, and it was just total hot mess of a script. But the woman liked it enough that, you know, she continued to support him and to support us. And he continued to like the idea. And we ended up, he didn't get this grant, but he ended up working with me. You know, we talk about the film and we talk about the story. And then I'd go back and I'd write it. And this happened for a few years. I ended up writing, this was my screenwriting class. This was how I learned how to write a script, is I wrote 12 drafts of somebody's, you know, of this guy's story, which really evolved into my own story. It was about a young woman who traveled in Latin America. And it's funny because he wanted it to be about this, you know, 40-something-year-old Mexican guy who ends up with this really hot young Brazilian woman. And he was this 40-something-year-old Mexican guy. And he wanted to co-produce it in Brazil. And so he had it, you know, had this young, hot Brazilian woman. He was this character, you know, this Mexican guy with a little kid, and he had a little kid. So basically he was writing himself. He wanted himself with a hot Brazilian chick. And I was like, I'm just having trouble making this guy not be creepy. You know, I just keep writing him. And he's just, it's just, I can't make this relationship work. And so I said, can't we just make him hot and young like she is? So he said, Diego Luna, we'll get Diego Luna. You know, he was friends with Diego Luna, and he said, let's, you know, we always wanted to work together. So maybe, yeah, make him that age. And so overall, I wrote 12 drafts of this script, and 9 to 9.5 were page 1 rewrites, completely starting over. The story changed completely. The characters' age, obviously, the characters' professions, they're like just page 1 rewrites. And it wasn't until draft 9 that it started working at all. It was actually when I sat down, I got so many notes from so many people, and they all had their ideas. And every time they would, you know, give their notes, they'd say something like, so what is my credit? Am I like co-writer now? Is that my credit? And so it was just like this slog of, yes, I see. I see David, Mickey Evans. Yes, it's amazing how many people come out of the woodwork and say, so I told you what I thought of the script. So now I get, so now I get my name on it, right? That sounds fair. And it's just such a fight to get just the creative control of anything. And it was when I sat down and I literally took 65 pages out of the script. It had bloated into the size of like a Tarkovsky movie. And I sat down with a red pen, and I just slashed every single word, every line, every scene that wasn't moving the story forward directly, that wasn't directly moving it forward, that wasn't, if there was one thing someone said that wasn't motivated, or that what, you know, that didn't just seem like a tossed off line, or any scene that just seemed like filler, or if I couldn't justify one single thing being in the script, I chucked it out. And that was when it finally started working. It was 60 to 65 pages, you know, it was a very long script, and then it felt tight, and it felt like a story, and it felt like it was going somewhere. And a couple drafts after that, we sent it to Diego Luna, and he really loved it. And slowly, you know, over the course of all of this time, the 12 drafts, they got the funding together. It was a co-production with Brazil. So it was a Mexico-Brazil co-production. They found this actress who had been in one film called City of God, which is a great Brazilian film. Alice Braga, who'd sent us a demo reel. Now she's, you know, Queen of the South, I think is the name of her show. But they had this beautiful chemistry together, and the film worked, and was accepted into the world competition at Sundance that year that we finished it. And the problem was that, like I said, the director, who was born on the same day as Francois Truffaut, and I always thought, you know, we shared a love of Francois Truffaut as a director. And I later realized that he just loved the idea of the auteur, of the director as God, kind of, you know, that the director has the vision, and that's the, you know, that's the whole film. is the director. And so he, toured around with the film and he told everyone that he had written it. He took 50% of the credit and 50% of the money. And even with the meetings that I got from the Sundance thing, it was very hard to parlay that into any kind of meaningful representation. And I met someone, I hung around with, different people in sort of that Latin American mode. The film is called Solo Dios Sabe, which means only God knows. And I met some Latin American artists and their representation. And one guy was interested in having me write the American version of this Argentine horror film that his client had done, which was, such a different genre. I was, this one that I'd written was an art film. But he had me write this, really creepy, kind of screwed up film. And I took the story, I talked to the director, and I ended up writing such a vastly more fucked up script than even that one was. He couldn't believe the ending. He was like, oh my God, that is so messed up. I love it. And so I realized that it was actually fun writing things that weren't art films and earnest films. And I did get representation from that management company after that. And I got set up to work with Michelle Rodriguez, he wanted me to write her something where she could kick ass, but show her vulnerable side. And she wanted me to write her an ensemble comedy, which was really weird and really hard to pull off. And I started getting into the realm of work for hire stuff, which is not fun. And I worked for Eddie Izzard's production company, where the woman changed the genre after I'd written the entire script. She decided, let's make it a different genre entirely. And so it was very exhausting, and it's not the most fun kind of writing you can do. And then I ended up telling my manager that I was pregnant and my first kid. And he was excited for me because he had 2 little kids and he was a big family guy. And he set me up to have regular brunches with his wife, but then he never got me a job again. I couldn't even get on the call sheet. It was like, forget it. So after a while, I just kind of dropped that manager, and because I couldn't, get him on the phone. And then it just kind of, it's very difficult if you don't have representation. As I think Cheryl mentioned, right? If you don't have a good agent or a manager, it's really hard to get any traction. And that's when I was writing. I met Howard after writing a script that I had originally started writing for Michelle Rodriguez before I dropped my manager. And then, all ties were essentially cut for me. And it was this sort of action thriller about a kick-ass female combat helicopter pilot who was hitchhiking from Fort Bragg, North Carolina to Chicago, and she gets stuck in Appalachia. And so Howard and I met then just on the phone. He came across the script, and I wrote I guess I should say that fast forward several years later, we started working together on a lot of projects, including turning that idea into a TV series, which we're working now with Atlas Entertainment, that we have a shopping agreement with them to turn that into something. I've worked with Peter Bratt, who's a local filmmaker from here in the city, from San Francisco. He called me up to write something with him for his brother Benjamin Bratt to star in, and so we kind of teamed up, and turns out he wrote all the kind of touchy-feely, heartfelt parts, and I wrote all the kick-ass adrenaline stuff, and gave it to his agent. And so it's more recently that I started working with his agent, who was like, wow, Peter, I've seen your work. He writes, beautiful stuff, but he doesn't tend to write this kind of violent adrenaline stuff. And so that's how I met his agent. And Howard and I have been working with his agent. And so the script that I originally showed Howard is now being produced. Will now has a producer that we're working on getting a director for. And that's not even to say the book that I wrote. When I was raising my kid, I wrote a young adult book just to get a different, sort of a change of pace. And I was a little burned out of script writing and I wanted to write a new format. So I wrote this young adult book that all of my writer friends, my fiction book writing friends at the time, all had really crappy deals. And so I didn't want to just get it published with a really crappy deal. I wanted to hold on to the rights. And so I put it up on this site called Wattpad. That is for young people. I wanted to see what my demographic thought of it. It was like aimed at like tween to teen girls. And they asked if they could feature it after reading it. And so they featured it. And from the day they featured it, in 2 months, it had 1 million reads. And it became like one of the most all-time read books on the site, and had this crazy fangirl following from like all around the world. I'd get messages from literally like every country, like Iceland, and like where you can't even imagine, you know, were like Muslim girls that were reading under the covers because they weren't supposed to be, you know, reading this stuff. And I'd get these great messages. And but yeah, I guess I really wanted to make that into something that was more in my medium, which was film. And it wasn't until more recently that Howard helped me turn that into a pilot, and that we, you know, kind of have a series pilot that we were teaming up with Bill Borden from High School Musical to produce that. So we've got these balls in the air. And am I missing any, Howard?
Well, with the Academy Award that you just won based on your podcast, Dan did a podcast that was, talk about your podcast for a second, and the Academy Award that was just won based on it.
Well, so I did a podcast episode that, well, I had something happen that I just kept telling the story to people because it was just such a strange thing that happened to me about, you know, these people that had moved in across the way from my living room, which I can see right out there, and you could see this young couple that moved in. And this obsession that I had with them not having curtains and having their bedroom, they moved their bedroom in where everyone else had a living room, and their bed was up against the window. And anyway, so I had this story about this couple that ends up, you know, the young frivolous period of their lives changed very dramatically at one point, and I kind of witnessed the whole thing. And it was called The Living Room, and it was on a podcast called Love and Radio, and then it was later rebroadcast on Radio Lab. And so yeah, for a while I had a feature film deal that I ended up having to kill for a lot of reasons. It was a pretty dramatic thing when you have a story about strangers, and then the strangers find out that you told the story about them. And that anyway, it was I was kind of overwhelmed with people wanting to make a film about it, wanting to make short films about it. And I didn't tend to, after a while, I just didn't tend to respond. But then this wonderful filmmaker, Marshall Curry, who's a documentary filmmaker, we had the same lawyer in New York at the time, and he contacted me and asked if he could make a short film. And I said, I don't want to be involved in it. I can't have anything to do with it, because the people that the story was about were not very happy about me telling the story. And so I bowed out and said, look, man, I'm not going to sue you if you want to make it, but you go for it, you know, just have at it. And so he did. And this year it won Best Live Action Short Film at the Oscars. So I got to go down to the Oscars, and that was a lot of fun. So yeah, that's true. I forgot that.
That's worth mentioning as well. So I think, you know, what we just heard were the common adventures in Hollywood and in life, and frankly, any business where the stakes are high and the rewards are high and the risks are high. There's a lot of luck comes into play. But the thing that drives all that luck is will and determination and effort. Everybody had to work their game throughout this process. Each of us in our own way found what we were getting better at and did more of it. But nobody had a roadmap. None of us came at this with a roadmap. We were all going to the racetrack and trying to win the car, like Pat won the car. And you know, it's an uncanny thing for any of us to talk to you guys, because you all want to win the car. You're all looking, you know, for the car. Where's the car? Where do I win? Where do I buy the ticket? How can my parents help me buy the ticket? My friends, my neighbors. And the truth is, we will help you find the car if we can. We'll help you win the car. We're here today, and we're here to help you practice at getting the car, winning the opportunity. But it's a long road, because even when Pat got the car, he still had to do something with the car. He couldn't just, you know, the car wasn't going to support him and give him his life's work. And you didn't go to New York in the car, did you, Pat? I mean, you did go to New York. Is that a yes or a no?
I did a bicentennial tour. I toured the country.
You did.
And I decided to go to LA after going to New York.
But look, we have some time for questions. Where are we at our schedule here?
Sedona already asked a question.
I know, I see that. We all have such illustrious careers with unique beginnings. How do you feel business has grown and changed the most since you began your career? And what do you think will change the most in the next 10 years? Do you feel that the hiring process has changed a lot since you started out? Let's go through that. And can we start with Mr. Evans, please, and just go through everybody pontificating thereon? That's a good question.
It is a good question, and it's really salient considering you know light speed changes that are happening these days. How do I feel it's grown and changed? Well, I mean, it's changed at least 3 or 4 significant times in the time I've had my career. When I started out, studio executives ran the business. Then they stopped running the business, and then the lawyers took over, and they had all the power, deal making and such and such. Then the lawyers stopped having all the power when agencies started selling out to hedge funds and stuff. And in the end, you know, the WG is in the middle of this ongoing war with agencies because of the packaging fees and all this kind of stuff, where in which, since they're public companies now, you know, their primary motivation and their primary responsibility is to make money for their investors and not to represent their clients. So we'll see how that works out. I mean, I know scores of agents that have quit being agents and become managers. I don't have an agent, I have a manager. And I don't want an agent. I mean, I had an agent for years and years and years, but it made sense back then. It does not make sense now, not for me. How's it going to change in the next 10 years? Streaming services for at least the next 5, in my estimation, are going to have more and more, and there'll be more and more and more of them. You know, the need for content is going to just get bigger and bigger and bigger. Good for writers, good for actors, good for directors, good for producers. That's super, you know, but still the legal crap still leaks in. I sold, last year, I sold a television series to Fox based on The Sandlot, where in which I got all the original guys back who are all now in their mid-30s, maybe 39-ish. And I did a whole television series based on them having their own kids in the 80s, because that's when they would have been that age. Slam dunk at Fox. It was the only project I ever had that I ever went in to where the head of Fox TV says, "Dave, I just want to tell you this. We're already buying this. So what's it about?" And so I was like, thank you, Bert. They buy it. You know, a couple months later, Disney Plus becomes Fox TV's overlord because Disney bought Fox. The project goes to Disney Plus. Disney Plus, you know, hires us all, my showrunner, my producer, my this, my that. We make a great pilot and they go, and we're making it. Since that time, Disney Plus has gone through count them, three CEOs and executive staff. So my television show is sitting there. They need original content and nothing is happening because of politics. Now, that's sort of, the story of Hollywood, in total, in a nutshell, but it's really, really hectic and very, very concentrated and very pressurized today. Because there's so many outlets, there's so many distribution platforms, and so on, so on, so on. I try not to think of any of this like ever, but I have to, and I think the other panelists will probably agree with me. I hope is that and I know that I'm getting a little sidebar here, Howard, but it's like you gotta be aware of that because you have to deal with it, but you gotta push that stuff away. I have to consciously push it away, not think about it, so that I can do what I do, which is mostly I write. So has the hiring process changed? I don't think so. I mean, I'm not on the inside of that sort of thing. When I do a picture and I'm directing it, I just hit, email all of my normal crew people. And, I've been very, very fortunate. They all have said, yes, we'll come and do a picture with you, Dave. Sometimes I have to hire someone new when somebody's not available or somebody's passed away or whatnot. And for me, the hiring process for me, I've never really, I've had to pitch myself a few times and such, but again, I've been very lucky because my work's done my talking for me. And I've gotten gigs where I've never met the producers or the studio in person. And they give me the project, I do it, I turn it in. But as a boss, I do hire people. And for me, really, it's if I get along with this person and this person claims to understand, the way I work, I need this support. This is what I need from you. Everything's going to be cool. Then it's very simple for me. That's just my experience. So I don't think so. I guess the greatest thing I ever heard about Hollywood was when Charlie Rose asked Steve Martin, he goes, what is your advice to young people or somebody that wants to break into Hollywood because it's impossible? And Steve Martin says, oh, dude, it's easy. Just be so good they can't say no. And that's been my experience.
Pat? Can you comment on this? Can you?
Sure. I think the biggest change is the real obvious biggest change is the technology. Everything is available to everyone to create with. Whereas it used to be you'd have to rent and get professional equipment from professional vendors. You can now get professional cameras are purchasable for almost anyone who wants to. Editing is software that you can learn. It's easy. And coloring, you can do your own coloring, you can do your own effects. It's actually shocking how simple it is to put together a film today compared to when we all started. It's actually absurd, and it's one of the things that makes that I'm always amazed by. It's why I can tell anyone who asks me how much we can make a movie for. I can say it can be I can make it for any price. It depends on what you want in that movie. And so I would say the technology. The other thing is the attitude. We used to be open to a lot broader scope of content, and not in terms of because there's a great variety of content now that's totally different, but I'm talking about from a literary point of view. Longer projects there were a lot of a 2-hour movie was not a problem when we all started. Now you get past 90 minutes, you're going to be asked to cut that down. It's just so our tolerance for our patience to absorb creativity has been shortened dramatically by the on-demand society. So I think that those are two big changes that I see, and of course, the kind of content from a social point of view is much more, it's much more attentive to the individual sensibilities, as opposed to, we used to get away with terrible types of stereotyping and all those kinds of social missteps that are no longer acceptable or whatever. So I would say that those are the kinds of things that I think have changed. The hiring process to me is not changed, except I would say on maybe a corporate level it might have. I think your degree is super valuable on a corporate level, and because it really shows that you're capable of completing a task, a big task, an important task. You're responsible. You're someone who can be relied on, and someone who is capable of actually achieving whatever task you're given. At least that's what it says to start with. And then how you execute is a different thing. From a production standpoint, you're all talking entry-level type things. So it's the exact same. You just have to be there for the right opportunity. You have to make yourself available to be there. And you do that by networking as heavily as you can and meeting as many people as you can. So I think your enthusiasm and desire to be available is the secret to getting a job in any production. It always has been. I think it's actually easier today than it ever was. There's just so much content, and everybody needs